Welcome back. So Brad, this time, man, I'm hoping what we can do is show the difference between probably the most common data center. I think the data center we're about to show you is you'll find all over the country and a lot of our customers. And walk you through this one, and then in the next episode take you to a real SAS 70 data center and show you the differences. So what I'll do is I'll start entry, and maybe you can tell us what we're doing right now.
Yeah, so one of the first things you want to look at as it pertains to data centers or hosting centers in general is just physical security, things like that. What kind of access do you need to even get into the building? What kind of things are you going to require your users to get into the facility, like where there's actually networking equipment, servers, and things like that. In this case, we gotta have a standard alarm, right, that requires an automated code, and so something like that can be associated with a particular user. In this case, we control access in that fashion. But then, in addition to that, we have a key fob right here, because you gotta imagine that a standard code can be hijacked, it can be overseen, and then basically used by anyone, quite honestly. And so when you have a key fob though, I mean, this basically is not only tied to the user, but it and the sensor will rotate automated codes every so often so that so it can't be stolen as easily. So in this case, we'll use a fob as well.
Yeah, so you'll need 2 points of entry. You'll need the code and the fob to get in. This is just a normal situation. The first thing you'll see and want to discuss in most data centers is 1 is none and 2 is 1, right? So we'll be talking a lot about redundancy, but what you'll see in this data center, and this again, I would call this more of a general data center or a hosting center. Mm-hmm. What you'll see is there's a hot side and a cold side. So we'll talk about climate control the very first topic. So the first thing is you'll see a floor unit here. This is called a spot cooler. And this is basically for redundancy or for when temperatures are hot or whatever. You can use it as supplemental air. But there's also redundant units. The airflow coming into this data center is on 2 different rooftop units. So we would have to have basically 3 points of failure to not have air in circulation in here. Brad, maybe tell us about the hot and cold zone.
Yeah, well, first thing, if we can go back real quick, I'm not sure if you saw at the bottom of the spot cooler, but there's some water sensors down there, because there's, just like in the case of monitoring, when you're looking for something, you want to basically have, you want to be checked for out of band conditions. And so in this case, if in fact the spot cooler were to overflow and the water, basically the water catcher doesn't work properly or it overflows, then it will tell somebody about it. And so that can be said for any amount of things. But back to your question, Alan, about the climate control. In here we have a curtain set up that physically separates the hot side from the cold side. As you guys probably know, the front side of the servers is where the cool air mostly gets pushed into so that it can ingest the colder air. And then of course, as it blows through the systems and gets sent out the back side, there's like a warmer side. So that's after it's worked through. And the things you have to be very careful about is that warm air doesn't come basically over the back of the racks, come across the top, and then basically go back to get sucked back in. And there are a couple of ways that you handle that. In this case, we just physically separate it with a curtain, and it works.
Yeah, there's many ways to do it. I see injection into the racks. I see injection, cold air injection under the suspended floors. But for this particular environment, this works, and it's very, very functional. And maybe a lot more economical in some situations. Like we don't have raised floor in this environment. So you'll see that also, as far as climate control, the temperature's monitored on the back and the temperature's monitored on the front. We like keeping control of all those, both those different zones. So I guess the next thing to note is, the overall tidiness of the data center, right? It's very important. For instance, cable management. You'll see the track going across the top of over the racks there. You don't see any cables. Well, that's important, man, because a lot of times you start getting multiple racks in here. Chasing these cables down can be a bear.
And and one of the questions you want to ask yourself, if you're going to look to go into a hosting center, or if even you have your own hosting center, I mean, if you have the CEO show up, you got to ask yourself, man, do they need a couple of days to like clean up and get it to a point? Because you really do want to, as you walk in, you basically want to feel like, wow, this is where my money is going, right? My hard-earned money, the money that we're basically making right? This is what it's going to. So if the first feeling you have when you go inside your own or somebody else's is like, oh man, I need some to clean up a little bit, that's an indicator.
We've seen a couple. In fact, it'd be kind of cool to show some of those pictures one day. Like, oh goodness! But you know, in a proper data center, there should be another level of security here, and it should be like locks. It should be like cabinet locks and different stuff. Filler plates make a big difference. You know, not just for cosmetically, but for that climate control as well in there. But the next thing you'll note is there's a UPS in each rack. And there's many ways to accomplish that, but Brad, what is a UPS and why is it important?
Yeah, so before we tackle that, it's important to understand just general power and facilities. And so first, wherever you happen to be sitting, your primary method of power either comes from a single source or multiple, right? It's, you know, X power company and Y power company. You know, that's the first, basically the primary method of giving house power. But then you always have to ask yourself, what happens if in fact that interrupts, or if it just outright fails? And so in this case, here, the one you're looking at, we do have uninterruptible power supplies, or UPSs, right? And what these things do is a handful of things. First, it will basically measure the power coming in. If it's too high, if it's too low, it will regulate that for you and give your equipment some sort of normalized power. The other thing it'll do is if in fact there's a brownout condition or a failure for a moment in time, it will stabilize the load being given to the equipment in the rack. And so that's important, again, for the consistency, but we also know how ugly things can be if surges or something like that happens to, you know, very sensitive technical equipment. And then the last thing you want this thing to do is, in the event of a complete power failure, you want this thing to hold you for enough time it takes for your backup power supply to kick in. And so in this case, these things aren't wired to run for hours and hours. This thing should run for between 10 and 15 minutes so that it can hold the equipment until the generator can kick on and start servicing the primary power. Or it will hold it long enough so that the generator should kick on and start supplying power. And if in fact that starts running but doesn't supply the power for some reason, you still have some reaction time to go figure out what is going on before it completely fails in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the generator in this facility, and by the way, there's a gas propane generator. You know, it kicks on within 10-15 seconds. So that's really all you need them to kick on. But Murphy's Law, it doesn't always happen that way. So these UPSs are also sophisticated enough that for some reason I'm not getting the power. It can shut down soft. I mean, they have, APC has a product called Parachute, and it literally, it's pretty amazing product. Because, you know, our failures don't occur, or real damage doesn't occur coming down soft most of the time. It comes down, boom, power's gone.
That's right.
See ya. So each rack has a UPS, and you'll see some labeling systems here too. Another component that's overlooked is actually, you know, when you start getting multiple servers, and each server has 15, 20 different workloads on it in a multi-tenant situation, where is everything, right? So you'll see these labels as an identifier back to a Visio that's typically in the back. So that organization is extremely important as well. So Brad, we've talked about security a little bit. We've talked about climate control. We've talked about, you know, appearance and locks. But okay, this is all fine and dandy, but how do I get to my stuff? I mean, there's got to be connectivity in and out.
Yeah, that's right. And so as you look at redundancy, as you look at what you're looking for, you know, we've in this particular data center, if you were to look at all the individual racks at the top of them, you would see single switches that serve this entire stack. Because, you know, quite honestly, switches by their very nature just work.
Yeah.
You know, but as you look at the likelihood, but also the impact of some sort of failure, you know, that basically goes up as you move closer and closer to the WAN side, like you said. And so, you know, for instance, in this data center, even though we have singular racks serving the switches, you look at the core switches, the core firewalls and things like that, those will be in a high availability situation, so that if in fact one of those were to go down for some reason, that there is redundancy there. You know, because as you look at what it takes to, you know, serve workloads and serve customers, you know, there is going to be a single point of failure somewhere, You just have to basically have your eyes wide open about those single points of failure and mitigate the risk in somehow. You know, for instance, if in fact one of these things were to die, the single switch, then we'd have a standby able to be plugged in immediately with configurations.
Absolutely. So we hope we gave you an overall glimpse of what we think a normal data center or hosting center operation is. You know, there's redundancy, there's everything. But I think next week you really want to check out the next episode, because I think you're going to be blown away with what a real SAS 70 data center looks like. So thanks so much.